I think we have grown very rapidly and retained our number three position throughout the, let's say, the period post-COVID. Ever since the first unlock happened on May 17, I think since then we have never looked back, and we have retained the number three position in the passenger vehicle industry. So that's a very, very, very proud moment for us. I think we are known for making India's safest cars. All of us are, pretty aware of it. That's where we have created a niche, and we build cars for our customers, and we care for our customers, and that's why we take pride in building the safest cars. We are also leaders in electric vehicles with a market share of almost 70% in the country. So that's also another a lead that we have taken in terms of serving the nation's people. I think with the manufacturing plants which have been located in Pune as well as in Sanand, based in Gujarat, I think our supply chain is spread across the country with also a few global suppliers who form the part of the supply chain. Like in most other automotive OEMs, I would say the supply chains traditionally have been linear. They are legacy oriented, monolithic, which means they are based on single source suppliers primarily, and the focus has been more on scale and cost. Now, this is where I'm talking about where we are in a large way. Maybe if I would describe the position almost about 1 year back. And Dipanshu, in your initial address, you talked about the resilience of the, let's say, the industry basis the experience that probably was gained in 2011-12 after the Japanese event. I fear that probably the impact of that particular incident was not as severe as what has been the current situation, and as a result, probably the industry did take some knee-jerk measures, but not good enough for us to be prepared for this sort of event. Would be my take on that. I think COVID-19's impact on the supply chains has been profoundly disruptive, to say the least. Reeling under the sudden lockdowns, fluctuations in demand and supply, logistics disruptions, shortages. I think the industry has been literally crippled. On the other hand, there has been a distinct shift in the customer preferences. Customers have now moved over to personal mobility. In fact, as all of us would appreciate, that in the era post-COVID, no one wanted to use shared mobility, right? So that is something which is a major shift that has happened. Customers are now opting for customization, which means customized vehicles is what they are seeking, and which means it calls for a different sort of approach from the industry. All these things are happening while we went into a lockdown, and we are coming out of the lockdowns. So these are the challenges. Against all expectations, I would say the passenger vehicle industry has recovered by and large to the previous year levels. I'm referring to the FY 2021, where we did almost around 2.7 million vehicles, and the previous year was 2.8. So by and large, it had recovered to that level, and this is despite the lockdowns, despite the Q1 having been totally washed out. And this is only because of the shifts in the mobility preferences I talked about. It is also because of the pent-up demand which was there, where people realized the need for the safe cars, and that's where it has really, the passenger vehicle industry has actually benefited. Having said that, I would say innovation is driving softwareization and electrification. I use the word softwareization because in today's cars, you see a lot of softwares. I think there is no car without a software, and there is no car without the electronics chips and the semiconductors, which are finding more and more usage in the cars, without which today's cars would not be complete. So that has posed a different sort of a challenge, and this is leading to a huge cultural and organizational change on the whole, I would say. While we are grappling to come out of the COVID wave 2, I think the global shortages in semiconductors and also, as you rightly said, Dipanshu, the growing demand of the commodities continues to be a growing challenge in the near term and the medium term. Why I say medium term? Because we really are not very sure when the situation will normalize. So to that extent, I would say that, presently, if I ask, most of the business heads would be, strategizing effective business continuity plans with supply chain at its core. There is a dire need for a very, I would say, a very agile, productive, digital, resilient, and a sustainable supply chain. Now, these are the five demands of the current supply chain which are emerging. And unless we are able to provide these five attributes in the supply chain, I'm afraid that we will not be ready for the future. And it is those who are ready on these aspects who will always have an edge. I would also say that adopting a digitally integrated and collaborative approach with our supply chain would always provide an edge, and those who are able to adopt it and do it would have a a distinct advantage. I would also say that proactive risk management, not reactive, because today the entire globe has been reacting to the situation that has emerged. But what is the learning for all of us is that we have to be proactive in the risk management in terms of creating collaborative networks across the supply chains, ranging right from the demand, supply, the logistics, the production, everything put together would put us in a better position in terms of tackling such uncertainties in future. It is, I would say, call for a total supply chain transformation. That's what I see it as, and I'm sure that, like us, most of the OEMs within the automotive industry as well as the other industries have realized this, and they are very well on their way for digitalization and taking all the measures to be ready for the future. Good question. Actually, there are many learnings out of this pandemic, and rightly so. Diversification, localization, these are some of the key words which would play a significant role. But before I go on to that, I would like to touch upon some very basic and elementary things which I think we as an industry, people are required to do. Because as Mr. Ramani mentioned earlier, that while the ERM, and I think Mr. Gera also mentioned earlier, while the ERMs are there in most of the companies, but they remain on paper. The enterprise risk management, it only is a very superficial activity. And I guess this pandemic has taught the managements the importance of ERM, and now it has got a very different name in terms of BCP. BCP is again more or less a reaction, or maybe it is a preparation, but it's a part of the overall enterprise risk management. And we need to be, preparing this in a very, very robust way, having a very, very strong governance around it in terms of protecting the companies from such uncertainties that we have gone through in the recent past. And that is one key takeaway that we had actually coming out of this. Coming back to the supply chain, as I said, there were 5 key words that I used in the earlier response: the agility, the productivity, a very productive supply chain, the resilience. We talked about the digitalization as well as the sustainability. Right now, if I look at it, I think diversification is an integral part of it. And if I again go back and try to analyze where we have come from, like when we were preparing the BCP in the just before the wave 1, in fact, the COVID lockdowns happened first in China, right? And it's that time that in anticipation, I think some of the progressive teams, some of the progressive companies started doing BCP in case it comes to our shores, which it did, right? So we were luckily a part of that team, and we were working on the BCP in a very, very focused and dedicated manner sometime beginning of February, so that by the time we entered into a lockdown on March 23rd, we had our BCP plan ready. And that is what saved the day for us. And that's the reason why I recall May 17th was the first unlock. And since that day, we have not looked back. We were so prepared for it. And it is only well-planned activities which can be well executed. So the BCP process was all about planning while we were under lockdown, envisaging, anticipating, and then working towards trying to mitigate the risk. So in that, there was what I call is an alternate strategy. Yeah, when you say diversification, you name it as an alternate strategy. So whether it is the parts, whether it is the processes, whether it is the suppliers, whether it is the locations where we make the parts, right? So it was extremely important. I think it's a big takeaway that there should be diversification. I made a reference to the earlier, remark regarding the then state of supply chain, which I mentioned about it being monolithic, which means that the supply chains were focused on a single source supply, right? And that was more driven by the scale and the cost and so on. But today, I think it has been exposed because depending on one supplier, and if because of this unprecedented event, the capacities are short with the supplier, I think your entire business is then exposed to a single source. Whereas if you would have had a strategy which was on the basis of multi-sources, multi-location, which is what diversification is all about, I think we would be better prepared to take care of this, eventuality. The other part which comes in to my mind is that, just before the BCP started, I'm referring to the wave one again, we never had mapped all our suppliers. And what I mean by that is, generally when we say suppliers, we restrict our visibility to tier ones. We didn't have tier two visibility in many cases. And that's what transformed into a supplier grid, right? So supplier grid and supplier network, these are the two terms which are coming out, which now it is imperative that every organization, at least we believe that we should have at every given time, so that we have at least a complete visibility of our supply chain, the value chain that is across, and in case of a problem, we know where what buffers are required to be provided, where diversification is required, what is the risk. So a very fundamental and elementary thing is that of a supplier grid. And then of course there was a part related to criticality index. So of course, even a nut not being available on a given day can stop the production. But notwithstanding that, there are certain critical parts where the diversification strategy is required to be adopted. So creating a criticality index basis certain parameters would be very, very helpful for the teams to really churn out an effective diversification strategy, as you said. So completely agree with you. That's one thing which is a very important and key element of the strategies emerging going forward. That's what all collaborative working is all about, since the previous question was related to collaboration. And unless let's say, our tier two knows about our pain, he would not really be, able to visualize and put in those extra efforts which are required. Say, for example, our volumes have got ramped up significantly. Now, how is this supplier going to be able to assess whether this is a buffer creation by an OEM or whether it is genuinely because the volumes are getting ramped up? The volumes may be getting ramped up because of a new launch, because of gain in the market share and so on. But given in isolation, if he looks at the data, let's say there is another OEM who is well below their earlier numbers, and when they put in their numbers, it seems to be on par with what they have been sourcing so far. Whereas another OEM like us, when we put in our numbers, it is significantly higher than the previous years. Now, how does it differentiate it unless until he has a dialogue with us and understands the perspective? So I think, these meetings are extremely important. And I think, Mr. Siva, Rajiv, everyone has, emphasized on the need for collaboration. I think that's the way to go forward. And we are seeing, excellent results as far as this is concerned. Pause, reflect, and take the right actions to build resilient and adaptive supply chains. And when I say supply chains, I'm referring to networks. Focus on collaboration, focus on digitalization, because digitalization is, many times we get lost in the jargon because it's become a jargon. We don't really understand the meaning of digitalization. So we need to look back and try to see how we use the current technology. It may be as simple as creating a very strong dashboard and measure the supplier performance on a day-to-day basis. and that would provide a very early warning signal in case the supply performance is deteriorating for an organization to take some advanced actions. So, this is something which we need to really apply. So, as I said, time, very crucial time for the industry to sit back and really look at the supply chain and, really work on a supply chain transformation strategy, which is a great opportunity. And as I said, it is only the difficult times which bring in the improvements, and these are the right times for the industry to really, take over and transform.